Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. So today I'm kicking off a series of videos looking at top 10 albums of each decade. It'll culminate at the end of this year when it'll be the time to do the end of another decade, but I'm going to be going right back to as far as the 60s. This first video is going to be the top 10 albums of the 2000s. So that's any album released from 1st of January 2000 through to the end of 2009. I can only do my own favourite albums, so I'm sorry if your favourite album isn't there or have included something you hate. I can only tell you what's my favourite. So I don't have a particular order for this, apart from I do have a top 3, so I'll make it clear which they are as we go along. So let's get cracking. I'm going to show you some albums that didn't quite make the top 10. These were considered but didn't make the final cut, so they're running along the bottom there, so you'll be able to see those. They will not feature in this top 10, so let's see what did. First album I'm going to show you is an album by the Kings of Leon, and it's their second album, Aha Shake Heartbreak. So I had a bit of a puzzle about, do I include this or do I include the debut album? Because that debut album's got some songs on that are just my favourite songs of probably this millennium so far. But overall I went for this one just because of the consistency throughout. Let's see if I can get you the track list in there. Just show you that. So I think it's just really good all the way through. Just some great songs that they made. I was looking today at the first 3 albums and just packed full of great songs. I preferred them in their early days when they were sort of, to me, the best garage rock band in the world, and then they tried to become the best stadium rock band in the world, and I just don't think it was as good from then on. But that is a superb album, so I'm having that in my top 10. Next album that I've got, Paul McCartney, Memory Almost Full. Regular viewers to my channel will know that I love a bit of Paul McCartney. Well, I love a lot of Paul McCartney, in fact. So this album from 2007, I really love this album. Anybody who saw my McCartney album ranking videos that I did, you will know that I rank this pretty highly amongst all his albums that he's done since the Beatles finished. The sound quality is pretty terrible on this album, and it would be great if we got a remixed, remastered version one day. I'm not quite sure which of those two would be needed to make this sound fantastic. But the songs are great all the way through. Dance Tonight is a good fun opener. I know some people don't like that song, but I love it. And all the way through, it's full of great songs, apart from Gratitude, which is awful. It's a terrible song, but forgetting that, overall, brilliant album by Sir Paul McCartney. That's Memory Almost Full. The next album I'm going to show you, I might well pronounce this wrong, so I'll have 2 or 3 different attempts. It is called Soviet Kitsch. Kitsch. It's by Regina Spektor anyway. It's not quiche. So it's this was the first album that I heard by Regina Spektor. In fact, the first song that I heard, I'd never heard of her until the radio was on one day, and Us, which is a song from this album, was on the radio, and it just knocked me out. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. So I pretty immediately got as many of her albums as I could, and this is, to me, probably her best album all the way through. I mean, there's no songs on there that are what you would call really famous songs, but some of them are just beautiful. There's a song on there called Chemo Limo, and it's just heartbreaking. I don't really get emotional at songs. It's not the kind of person I am, but I do when that song's playing. It just rips you apart. It's beautiful, but Us is a fantastic song. I saw her play it live a few years ago, and she can recreate these songs, her and a piano, as good as what's on the record. But love that album. That's definitely well in my top 10. Next one is it's Oasis. Don't Believe the Truth. They only made one more album after this one. But this was, I thought, a real good return to form after the couple of albums that went before it. Just get you the track list in there for those of you that are familiar with Oasis. Lila was the big sort of opening single from this album, and that's a real good rock song. But again, I think it's consistent all the way through. All right, maybe something like Mucky Fingers isn't amazing, but it was just real good songs all the way through. Liam was singing really well on this album, and it's a good sort of collaborative group effort as well. It's the songs written by various members of the band, so Andy Bell, Gem Archer, they were all chucking songs in. It wasn't just a Noel Gallagher written album by this point, but you know, I still regularly have a play this album, and it's still a real good solid. I think I put it as number 3 when I did an Oasis rankings album. That's Don't Believe the Truth. The next album, it's the only one of this top 10 that I've got on vinyl. It is Kate Bush, Ariel, which came out in, I think it was about 2005. It was the first album that she'd done for about sort of 12 years since the Red Shoes, so it was really highly anticipated when it was announced. And it's split into 2 sections, really. You've got the first part is called A Sea of Honey, and there's a bit of a, not massive, but there's a bit of a water theme sort of throughout that with Mrs. Bartolozzi, which is a great song about washing your clothes. Well, it's not about washing your clothes, but they feature heavily as the in the lyrics of the song, but it's a really good song. A Coral Room, which is a really lovely song dedicated to a mother who died before this album was made. And the second side, A Sky of Honey, which is very much a sort of a concept piece equivalent to the 9th Wave that she did on Hounds of Love. It's just a great piece of music, and I think Kate didn't want to make that part of the album available to download individual songs. You could sort of download the whole thing because she regards it as one piece. And when she did a live shows about 5 years ago in London, one whole section of the show was dedicated to A Sky of Honey being performed live. That's a great album. It's one that I love to play if I'm going out walking in the countryside, want to get some tunes on. It's a real good album for when you're out walking. That's Kate Bush, Ariel. The next 2 albums that I wanted to show you, I wanted to put them sort of side by side, one after the other, and I'll explain why as we go along. So the first one is Sean Lennon, Friendly Fire. So this was his second album. The first one had come quite a lot of years before. I think probably 8 or 9 years before this was his first album. But this is just quality tunes all the way through, and it's weird with Sean because he looks so much like his dad, but he sounds nothing like him. I do love his singing voice, but it's not like Julian Lennon where you listen and you think, oh, it sounds just like John. Sean doesn't sound anything like him, but he's a great musician in his own right. I've seen him live a couple of times, and when I've seen him playing guitar, I've often watched him and thought, I don't think John could have played what you're doing as well as you're doing. He's a great lead guitarist. But that's just great songs all the way through. And I spoke to Sean actually round about the time this album came out. I went to see him in Liverpool, and I managed to have a chat with him afterwards, and I was asking him why he'd taken so long in getting round to making this second album after his first one was, like I say, so many years before. And he said to me that he just didn't really feel ready properly, as though he'd maybe gone a bit too early with his first one, and he didn't feel ready for a lot of years to continue with his music career. But by the time this came out, he was certainly ready to go for it, and he's done a lot of interesting things since. He's been in a band called Ghost of a Saber-Toothed Tiger, and his current band is called, somebody will correct me here, it's something like the Claypool Lennon, I can't remember anyway, but yeah. He is a really good musician in his own right, and that is Sean Lennon, Friendly Fire. The reason I wanted to mention the next album in my list next to that was because this was somebody I discovered when I saw Sean Lennon that night in Liverpool, doing his gig there. This was the support act, and this is a guy called Paul Steele. And this was his album he was plugging at the time called April and I. And in fact, before I talk about it a bit, I just want to show you this because this is pretty funky. This is it's like a children's cartoon book. You can see how thick each page is. So that's good. I really like this. But this album, anyway, getting back to it. This album is, I think he made it just in his bedroom on his own. And it's a concept album all about having an imaginary friend. And it's a concept about their friendship and the life that they go through together. and I just really, really love this album, and I have done since I first heard it back in about 2007. So it's probably one that maybe not a lot of people have heard of, but it's certainly worth checking out. He's made another couple of albums. He actually made a follow-up called well, originally it was going to be called April and I Too, but I think its actual name was Carousel. Was it Carousel Kites? Apologies if I've got that wrong. But that's a fantastic album and well inside my top 10 for the decade. Okay, so I mentioned that I knew what my top 3 were. So those 7 there, you can pretty much put them in any order. But I do have a top 3. Right, in third place from 2006, it's the debut album by the Arctic Monkeys. It's Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. And this, as far as I'm concerned, the Arctic Monkeys are probably the best band in the world over the last 15 years or so. Fantastic debut. To me, this is a concept album. The concept being a night out. So, starting off the view from the afternoon. This is, you know, before you go out, you've got songs all about getting there, going out in the taxi, going to the cash machine, getting your cash, having a dance, and then just as the night comes down towards the end, having a bit of a run-in with the police. It's just a phenomenal album. I bet you look good on the dance floors. Probably one of the songs of the decade, really, I would say. Number 2. You might think it's a little bit of a cheat, me including this. And if you do, tough, because it's my list. It's Brian Wilson, Smile. I think this came out in, was it 2004? So a lot of you will know the story of the history of this album, such a complicated and long history. So back in the mid-60s, Brian Wilson, when he was the driving force behind the Beach Boys, he heard Rubber Soul by the Beatles and it absolutely knocked him out. He thought it was pretty much the greatest thing he'd ever heard. And obviously the Beatles and the Beach Boys had a very friendly but very sort of competitive rivalry. They wanted to make better music than each other. So he'd heard Rubber Soul. He was making Pet Sounds at the time, and he wanted to make Pet Sounds as good as it could be to try and be better than Rubber Soul. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That you can make your own mind up on that one. As far as I'm concerned, Pet Sounds is one of the greatest albums ever made. So he made Rubber Soul. He made Pet Sounds. The Beatles, pretty much around the same time, brought out Revolver. That certainly impressed Brian a lot as well. So he then started on Smile, which he wanted to be his sort of masterpiece. In the meantime, the Beatles recorded and brought out Sgt. Pepper. Brian's still making this album, and I don't know what went through Brian's mind when he heard Sgt. Pepper, but I don't think it did him any good at all. Eventually, the sessions for this album were abandoned because of Brian's ill health. And it just, you know, some of the songs appeared on Beach Boys albums over the next few years. But this album as a whole just stopped, ceased to exist. And then, thankfully, he felt well enough to be able to actually make the album in the early part of this century. The band The Wondermints, which some of you might know this story better than I do, were they a Beach Boys tribute originally? He decided to recruit them as the musicians to make this album, and it's just phenomenal. It's a beautiful album from start to finish. The album is supposedly sort of a story of the history of America. It goes from it's supposed to go sort of from east to west, and it shows you the genius of what the album could become. And then thankfully we got the Beach Boys version a few years later, which was sort of put together from the sessions that have been done so far. But I can't imagine how many times I played this album when it first came out. Just absolutely loved it, and it still sounds fantastic. And that was my number 2 for the decade, Brian Wilson, Smile. So my number 1, I definitely have a number 1 album of the decade, and it is the debut album from 2008 by the Fleet Foxes. Okay. Now, the first time I heard this album, I tried to figure out what I thought of it and what did it remind me of. And the best that I could come up with was, what did I think? It was something like Gregorian monks chanting the Beach Boys, which, yeah, if that conjures up an image in your head, then well done. But I think that just applies to the start of it, really. It just goes on to be absolutely packed full of great songs all the way through. I've got all these albums in iTunes, and I do the rating thing, you know, rating songs. In my world, a 5-star song is, you know, like they're the best. I'll never get bored of listening to these songs. This is probably the only album I've got where you look through iTunes and it's just 5-star, 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 start to finish, with one or two exceptions. It's just 5-star songs all the way through. It's brilliant. They've had two albums since? I don't think I don't think they've had 3. There's definitely 2 more albums since this, and they're both good. I don't think they hit the heights of this, but they're still very enjoyable albums. But this, for me, is a masterpiece, and definitely, I have no doubt in saying that is my #1 album of that particular decade. I'd be very interested to hear what are your favourite albums. Which ones of these do you like or hate? What albums would you have had in your top 10? Let me know in the comments. Love to hear from you as usual. But thank you very much for watching. I'm going to do the other decades over the next few months, so keep watching. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.